Welcome to A Moment of Bach, where we take our favorite moments from the composer's vast musical output, just a minute's worth or even a few seconds, and show you why we think they are remarkable. We are your hosts, Christian and Alex Giebert. We're back to Bach today after a short diversion into another composer, Vivaldi. Today is the Monday of Holy Week. For this episode, Alex has chosen the chorus that closes part 1 from the St. Matthew Passion, O Mensch, bewein, dein Sünde groß. In this really technically stellar piece of music by Bach, we get some flutes, some oboes, some strings, typical stuff, but the thing I really love about this is the rhythmic quality. Da 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 da. That stuff. I'm gonna listen to it here. Da 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 da. And then we get the choral entrance here on O Mensch, bewein, starting with the sopranos. Altos and tenors spinning out this first line here. So it's a typical format for Bach. Here comes the second line. The melody ended on B. This is a hymn that's composed of lines in groups of 3. This third line now will close out in a cadence. There we go, and it landed on the low E. So my moment is right near the end of this movement, but let's let this play out so we can hear the whole thing. Line 4. Which is like line 1, exactly. And here comes line 5, which is like line 2, right? There's always interplay between flutes and oboes. Dun 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 dun. Flute, 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 flute. Closing on E. The bass has to walk down and make it there. And that bass walking down at the end is going to be a theme that's going to repeat. And it's going to play into my moment, which is right at the end of the last line. Because we're at the middle here, Bach is taking us into an unusual place, into a more minor key. Here we're tonicizing C sharp minor. Here comes the next line, the 7th line of music. Starting on a high note there. More harmonically interesting. Okay, 8th line of music. And there are 12 total, so it's pretty symmetrical. Krankheit. Yeah, like Walter. But it means sickness, right? Illness? Yeah. Disease, yeah. Here comes the 9th line, so it should close us somewhere. It really doesn't. It's not final yet. It's a nice aspect of this hymn tune that it doesn't really feel final on the 3/4 of the way in. It makes us wait till the end. Now my moment that's going to come up is a moment of mode mixture where we get a minor chord, even in a major context. The 11th line, and listen to this bass. interesting, that C natural. Now we get some material from the intro again. We only have one line left. And here he's going to bring in the alto tenor bass first before the melody comes in. He's going to make us wait for it on a low pedal point B in the strings. And here we go, the final line. Going the cross suffered long. Last word, long. So that cadence, that's my favorite moment. Pedal point E last to the end. To close us out. Stunning piece of work, so meticulously constructed, just like we know Bach does, but emotional at the same time, especially when you know what the words mean. And we elucidated some of that for you non-German listeners. I mean, even if you are a German listener, sometimes it can be hard to catch exactly that pronunciation when there's so much else going on with the music, of course, and when we're talking over it in English. But let's listen to that last line to show my moment and why I really like that sound of what's happening in the bass continuo. Jumping up to that D natural. The C natural again, the mode mixture. It's a minor sound, an A minor sound. Outlining A minor. And landing on finally the E. So it's a plagal cadence. Those of you who know about cadences in music know that there's authentic cadences that are the normal 5-1 cadences, but it's not what we have here. We have what's kind of like an amen cadence, like a plagal cadence, going from the 4 chord to the 1 chord. But this is an unusual plagal cadence because it's a minor 4 to 1. It's not like that's that unheard of in Baroque music, but it sort of recalls, don't you think, Christian, the sort of more ancient forms, right? Like the modes. Things like this were heard more in the early Baroque composers like Samuel Scheidt. And what are some other composers that would use this a lot? Maybe Zachau?
Hassler.
Yeah, maybe Hassler. There's the older German Lutheran composers.
Praetorius.
Would use this sound a lot. Yeah, I think it ends up being, that's a good point, Alex. It ends up being something that sounds a little older, even though it, in a way, is like, could we argue that it's like a invention outside of the major and minor system? Right. You've got your major keys, you've got your minor keys, and what Bach is doing here is you're solidly in a major key, but at a very particular moment to add the right spice in, he what we call borrows a chord from the parallel minor key of E minor for that effect. But I guess you could also argue that it makes it sound like an older scale in a way too. So yeah, in the sense that in an old music that was with like a central tone of E in what we might now call E minor, you might end on E major. We call that Picardy third. So that's also part of this. It's actually kind of, they're actually kind of related. Yeah. Yeah, because there's a lot of modal stuff that you would find that's Phrygian, that are these old hymns, like Aus tiefer Not is one, O Sacred Head, right? From before Bach's time, it was sort of a Phrygian vibe, and it felt like C major maybe, but then it would end on E major. And so it would go from an A minor to an E major, and it would have that same cadence that we have here, which sounded, like I said, like a minor plagal cadence, but really, in that context, it was something a little more complicated based on the Phrygian mode. And Bach liked Phrygian mode stuff, and some of his chorales were like that, but I mean, it's a little bit of a diversion about what we're talking about. But it is interesting to me that he's got all this in his mind when he wants to create something like this. He really makes a moment out of it. This is why we have this podcast, because we see this beautiful 6-minute long chorale, fantasia basically, right? And it's mostly composed, it has some harmonic interest in the middle, but it mostly feels E majory on the outsides of it. And that one measure is striking, but then as soon as that measure's over, we hit that low E that carries us to the end. Then the rest of the woodwind stuff is just cute and fluffy and all E major. Mm-hmm. So let's hear that. So you're going to hear that ending of that choral moment with the interesting minor plagal, but then as soon as that low E hits, listen to the woodwinds, the nice fluffiness of that.
Another cool feature, the final note of the woodwinds is a short staccato note. The low strings on the continuo hold out just for a second more. That's how Bach wrote it, and that's how it's played here by the Netherlands Bach Society. I also want to zoom in on one other feature. Let's listen to that last line again. I'll start when the sopranos enter on the last line, on the word wohl, wohl an dem Kreuze lange. On that, we're listening for that melody. They end on the E. Lange. So they end on that E, while the bass is busy with the motion in the minor plagal thing that I was talking about. And then the bass is like a handoff in a relay race. Then the bass takes the E pedal point. Na, 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 E, they hold it. The bass is going, da, 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 and then it lands on the low E.
The basso continuo.
Not the singer. Clear. The bass string instruments really is what's playing that, yeah. And probably organ, I think.
That's text painting. Lange.
For a long time on the cross, lange, the last word there.
You know, I know this is your moment, but mine, if I picked one, I think I'd pick the ending of the last note, because it's just so delightfully unusual that something would end with a short note in the treble instruments, bump, and then the bass, for just a split second, holds longer because it's already been holding, so it has a different articulation. You notice that? On that low E. That's so nice how it hangs over a little. It just doesn't stop with the high notes. That would be not as interesting.
Yeah, it's such a clear choice by Bach here. And you wonder what the text painting of that is, if there is any. Remember we talked about in the Magnificat, we talked about the Esurgentes movement that has a really striking ending that's kind of like this, where it's a cute woodwind line, but it ends without really resolving. It goes da-na-na, and doesn't go bum. It doesn't give you the last note on the beat. Instead, it's just one little thump on the low bass there. So this kind of reminds me of that, but maybe it's a little more subtle than that. But I'm looking at the manuscript right now, and it's like very clear that Bach did that. There's no like...
Are there staccatos on the string parts in the manuscript?
There are not staccatos on the string parts.
That's interesting.
But wait, let me see if there are staccatos in the first few, because then he might not have bothered to write them all, you know?
Oh, yeah.
Yes, there are.
Yeah.
Yep. So then you extrapolate that those are always going to be staccato. He actually only writes them in the violin one part.
And regardless, it's a different value of a note. The strings, oboes and flutes have an eighth note, bump. The holding over bass note holds over into a quarter note. So the overlap is intentional.
And I really like the cinematography of this moment in this video.
Yeah, the bass player.
Yep. They linger on the bass bow there.
Yeah. The lowest note of a bass instrument.
Yeah.
I mean, typically. There are extensions to play lower, but yeah.
So when Bach sets a hymn tune, he can't compose the melody. So he can't do text painting with the melody, right? And some of these melodies already have it built in, and you could argue that because this poetry, because this verse of poetry ends with that word lange, that means that's going to be immediate text painting, because you're going to end on a long note when you sing a hymn. At least that's the normal thing to do. But what Bach does, of course, is he makes up the deficiency in text painting of the hymn tune with his own splendid orchestration. And you know what? It's actually a little bit of a disconnect for me with the cute, fluffy woodwind stuff that opens and closes this movement, and actually permeates the whole movement, right? That thing is kind of not, to me, painting the text of, oh man, bewail your great sin. And then it goes on to say, for Christ came to earth from his Father, talks about how he was born here, willing to give his life for us. And then at the very end, it again hits the sort of twists the knife on you and talks about, because of the heavy burden of our sins, he had to be on the cross for a long time. So only at the beginning and end does it really sort of ask us humans to think upon our sins, basically, right? Whereas the middle part is more about Christ. So I think Bach could have set this in a minor key, put the middle section in major, which would have been a very normal thing to do in a form like that, and ended minor about being on the cross. He could have set this in a much more pained and sort of dreadful sound, kind of like what he does with the opening movement of St. Matthew or St. John. He doesn't do that. He ends the first half of this work in a sort of comforting way. And even though I don't quite understand that choice, I find that I really love it, because coming after all of the sort of first half of the Passion story that we've had up to this point in the context of this work, this absolutely feels right here, to have something a little more comforting sounding and not quite as jarring or dreadful.
Yeah, it makes sense in context of the entire text. There are certain parts of the text where I really get it. Like, for this Christ from his Father's bosom went forth and came to earth of a virgin pure and gentle. He was born here for us, so a little bit of Christmas in there. Mm-hmm. He was willing to become the mediator. So there's a lot of like him lifting things from us, bear the heavy burden of our sins, that he would be sacrificed for us. So yes, it could have been set with a really heavy music, but on the other hand, maybe it's our reaction for the weight being lifted off of our shoulders.
That's a good point.
Although counter argument is that the first line, I mean, how many composers would see the first line, which is the title, and then set this sort of cute little thing? Because the line is, "Oh man, bewail your great sin." I think 99 out of 100 composers would take, "Oh man, bewail your great sin," and just make the most heaviest thing out of that you could make.
Maybe I mentioned that he could have gone minor, but he couldn't really, right? If he's going to use the hymn tune. So maybe that just was the consideration. It was just like, well, I want to use this hymn tune. It is major. I'm going to find a way to make this work in major key.
I don't know. I think there's plenty of major Baroque music that's perfectly serious and heavy.
Yeah, that's true.
Major and minor is not so simple,
And this is like really not heavy. This is, you can't really say this is heavy. This is light.
This is almost like in some ways happy. But then there's also the ba-da-da-da-da-da-da thing, which is a little bit, maybe a little sinister, because if you, musically speaking, like I'm taking a look at the very beginning, you hear it right away at the beginning in the flutes, and then you hear it in the continuo. When the bass singers enter, shortly after the soprano begins, they have "O Mensch, bewein," bum, bum, they have eighth notes, but yet the bass instruments have a da 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 da. They're the same notes, but it winds up that the bass instruments anticipate the next beat early. So there's an overlap effect that happens. They all hit the same notes on the beats, but on the in-between sixteenths, the really short moments, ba da 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 da, it isn't. They don't line up. If you plug this into your computer and made a music notation software play this, and everything was played at the same volume without articulation, it would sound awful.
Yeah.
Because every other note would clash. But it's absolutely intentional if performed correctly.
Right. You need to hit staccato or marcato on the notes is what you need to do for the choir so that it doesn't clash.
I think what you would do to make it a little bit more like what it should be is you'd have to just change every offbeat 16th note to you'd have to like lower its volume.
Right. And duration. That's what they do naturally. I mean, these are really good players, right? And they know to do that. They don't go da 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 da, right? It's da 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 da. Yeah. Like they're absolutely doing that. And that's what, and Bach, when he's writing this, he knows that's going to sound good like that. It kind of goes back to last week's episode with the Vivaldi moment where those were in pairs too at the beginning of that dun dun dun, and some of them were trills, and Vivaldi had them in pairs, marked as slurred but staccato. So the bow strokes was like down, down, up, up, down. And so here Bach has a similar thing where it's like da 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 da. They're in little pairs, and that's what is needed for this. But to your point, Christian, about maybe he was going for something more sinister with that. You know what actually would work better than would be a slower tempo.
I wonder.
And while I like this performance, when you do this with a slower tempo, that comes across more And there is actually a Netherlands Bach Society performance of this at a slower tempo, which I love. And I'll link this in the episode description too. Confusingly, it is a St. John Passion.
Alternate version, right?
Alternate version,
Yeah.
exactly. So St. John Passion does not include this piece of music, except for this alternate version, which was like a middle version of this work that Bach did in 1725. He replaced the opening movement that we know now with this new piece that he wrote for that. So this was actually originally intended for the St. John Passion, this piece, as an opening chorus. And then he later removed it and put it in the St. Matthew when he was writing that, which was later. And then he put back in the old one. So to the St. John. So this is actually intended for the St. John Passion. And I do think that that opening movement of St. John Passion, by the way, is a better opening text-wise for the St. John Passion and music-wise.
And just the tone of it.
And yeah. But if you listen to that version, which is a really nice version of this, specifically of the 1725 version of the St. John Passion that the Netherlands Bach Society has, they take it slower in that one. And it's really nice. And coming to my moment near the end, I can't decide which one I like better, but this one breathes a little more because it's slower. So listen to how this one ends in that moment.
So I have one more observation about the heaviness thing. I'm not sure it's about tempo as much as I was trying to think, why does this sound light to us? And I wonder if like one just simple reason is just little flute duets, or a duet of flutes, or a flute line in general. Sometimes it's harmony, sometimes they're together, but I think it's just not true of Bach's time that he would have thought of the flute in that cute of a way.
True.
Like
we have all these associations
Yeah.
of the flute being played in like maybe cartoons or whatever, just like as a cute sound, right?
But think about, and then think about on the other hand what Bach used the flute in. Crucifixus?
Gottes Zeit, which was a recorder, but still
Yeah, but
similar
he would have thought of
instrument.
that as flutes.
Yeah.
Yeah, like in the Mass in B minor, sometimes they take the most like devastating parts, and
Right.
opening of St. John Passion,
Yeah.
some really just harsh flute.
And in BWV 8, the one that has the flute, flute, the little like cute repeated notes, but to him wouldn't have been cute. The flute plays this 24 notes in a row little thing that's supposed to represent sort of like a death knell on a bell, because it was how many times the church bell in Leipzig rang funerals. But I mean, it's fast in this version, but it was, I guess what we're getting at is the flute was more serious. Right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
The flute is not cute.
Flute is not cute.
Flute not cute. What about the parallel between your moment and the Orgelbuchlein?
Oh
moment?
yeah, let's not skate past that.
I mean, I think the more famous moment is the organ one.
Yeah.
That C flat. It's a strange note occurring in the key of E flat major.
So that was in season 2 of our podcast, episode 24, back in 2022. Yeah, you're right, Christian. I think that's a more famous moment. The end of that organ chorale prelude. Bach chooses something that's very similar to this, right? He chooses, in the key of E flat, he chooses a C flat. He makes a moment out of it by specifically labeling it at a slower tempo, adagissimo, very slow.
Now that, in that case, the note that's being harmonized is one earlier in the phrase. And in this case, this is just an extension of the last note, lange, which makes sense in both cases.
Right, but in both cases they're a flat 6.
Yeah. It's the same chord.
Yeah.
And then look what happens after. It moves to the thing that would naturally come next, which is the minor 4.
Yep.
And in that case, I guess in this one it is that. And then it moves to the 2, also borrowed from the relative minor, that F sharp. In the case of the choral one, it's F sharp diminished.
It is,
seventh.
yeah. The F sharp is in there. Yep.
It's not on the bottom, which is different, but it is there.
But it's in there. Yep.
So the progression of chords. What I'm saying is the progression of chords is the same. I don't think that was an accident. There's no way. That's, in fact,
no.
I kind of wonder if this is a little Easter egg in a way, because it only happens here, right? It doesn't happen any other time in the.
Yeah.
It only happens at the end at Lange. The title of our podcast is A Moment of Bach. You could make a moment out of anything that Bach might have not even thought twice about. But Bach did think twice about this.
Yeah.
At least twice. He used it twice. It was an important moment for him.
Yeah. I will say, I was telling Christian right before we started recording this is a moment of Bach that I listen to all the time. This is a moment where I might have 2 minutes of free time and I can't listen to this whole movement, which is about 6 minutes. I will skip to the end and listen to this little moment. To give myself a little refresher for the day. It'll put me in a good mood.
And now, here is the ending of this chorale from the St. Matthew Passion. If this introduction to a musical moment has inspired you to hear the rest of this performance, please see the link in the episode description. To hear our new episodes as we release them, find us on your podcast app and hit subscribe. Also, what would be fun is if you are listening to this episode, go ahead and let us know, what is your moment that you keep coming back to? Alex was saying he skips to the end of this just to hear this part. Do you have something like that? Post it to one of our social media platforms.
All right, Christian, what is your moment for next episode?
On our next episode, it will be Easter Monday. We'll celebrate that with a joyous chorus from the Mass in B minor from the Sanctus section. This is the second half of the Sanctus section. Pleni sunt celi is the Latin text there. All of heaven and earth are full of your glory is the English translation of the full text.
Until next time.
Flute's not cute.
Flute's not cute. Enjoy those moments.